Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, Commerce Tomorrow. I'm here with my co-host, Kelly, and today our special guest is Raj Dedatta, CEO and co-founder of BloomReach. Welcome, Raj.
Thank you, Dirk. It's a pleasure to be with you and Kelly.
Great to have you here. As usual, we start normally with an introduction of our guests. So, Raj, can you tell a little bit more about yourself? And I know you have been done a lot in your personal career, but maybe you can share, the highlights with our audience.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be with all of you. So, a little bit of background on me. I started my career as a researcher at Bell Labs as an electrical engineer, and very quickly moved on from there to spend a little bit of time on Wall Street, and then have been, over the last 20 years, really an entrepreneur. And so I was involved in starting a telecom business in the late 1990s, where we built out a broadband network, providing internet services, and data center services, and all via 100-city fiber optic network. And so that was a lot of fun. That was my first entrepreneurial venture. I was involved in a second venture, which very early on was incorporated into Cisco, and ultimately it was really within Cisco where I built a load balancing business. And that was my second entrepreneurial venture. And then about now 9 years ago, I got involved in starting BloomReach with a early team, and it's been lots of fun ever since. So I think perhaps the way I would certainly describe myself as an entrepreneur, which I think is another way of saying that I'm fundamentally unemployable at this point, so I have no choice.
I had a T-shirt on. I wore the T-shirt yesterday when we had been at the lake that had on the background just unemployable. I bought it in LA on one of my last trips.
Yes, exactly. That is the true word for serial entrepreneur, is unemployable.
Yeah. So maybe you can start by. It was a good intro, by the way, but maybe you could continue and talk a little bit about BloomReach.
Sure.
When did you start it? Who did you start it with, and why?
Yeah, so the origin of BloomReach was interesting. I had been involved in a prior venture in the load balancing space and rebuilding load balancing. And I really wanted to do something that was, I would say, up the stack, rethinking things that touched people's lives a little bit more directly. And so around that time, and it was around 2008, 2009, and we were seeing the emergence of Google and Facebook and digital marketing exploding everywhere. And the internet kind of being used as a vehicle for digital marketing much more broadly. And I kind of thought to myself, this is an interesting trend. There was the use of AI and machine learning that was powering these very next generation experiences that Google and Facebook and Amazon and Netflix were all offering. And I kind of thought to myself, well, that's pretty interesting. What are they really using it for? And so much of it was being used for advertising-oriented technology, better ad targeting for these companies to reach users on a much more targeted basis. And I just felt like, everybody that I knew that was getting on the internet, very few of them would be saying, hey, I really want to go get on the web so I can check out some ads. Most people were really, much more centered on, I really want to have an experience online. I want to find products. I want to find a date. I want to read content. I want to plan a vacation. And so the origin of BloomReach really stemmed from saying, on the one hand, we've got these next generation digital upstarts of the Netflix, Amazon, Google variety that are employing really next generation technology, machine learning, AI, personalization technology, APIs, cloud, all to create these very modern customer experiences. And I felt like, what are the other thousands and thousands of brands that can't possibly go hire 25,000 engineers the way Amazon can? What are they going to go do to offer these next generation experiences that their customers are going to expect from them? And out of that initial intuition was, hey, let's go build a next generation digital experience platform. Let's make it possible to help create these magical and measurable digital experiences for all of the brands around. And let's offer that in the form of a platform so that these companies can execute on that quality of customer experience without needing to go hire 25,000 engineers. And out of that came BloomReach. And 9 years later, we remain very centered on that mission and vision.
Yeah, it's an incredible success story so far. And I think we will dive deeper into the offerings of BloomReach within this episode. But before we start, I think there sometimes is a confusion of terms out there, and maybe you can help us at least clarifying that for our audience. So some companies talk about CMS, some name it WCMS. I know the modern term also that you use is DXP. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences and nuances in between of these three terms? And definitely, probably there are even more out.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we as an industry are really, really good at coming up with three-letter acronyms. Yep. So it probably starts with that. But actually, I believe this is a fundamental change. And so, if you think about what a content management system, a CMS, really is, I think to describe it really simply, it is an application. It is an application that is focused on helping content managers and content editors manage their content, publish their content, and ultimately build these websites, particularly, that allow them to commercially manage the content on those websites. That is what a content management system has historically been. And it's been an industry that's been around for a long time, and it's been very effective. And so we at BloomReach have an amazing CMS that came out of our acquisition of a company called Hippo. And that CMS does those things really well. It helps you manage your content on a website. It helps you publish that content. It helps you edit that content. It's an application that's really good at that. But the DXP really stems out of a couple of other, fairly substantial trends. The first is that what we are seeing is that whereas a CMS is really for content marketers to manage their content and edit that content, a DXP is really a platform that is as much for developers to build on a platform as it is for marketers to manage content and edit that content. So a first major distinction, I believe, is that whereas a CMS is an application, a DXP is a platform. And that's a really, really important distinction, because if you think about the kind of experiences that many of our and other customers are building, they're no longer just building, simple websites. They are building, we have customers like Bayern Munich that run their entire stadium experience on BloomReach. They're building on the BloomReach platform. In fact, several months ago, they ran a hackathon where they invited thousands of developers to build applications on the BloomReach DXP. You couldn't do that on a traditional CMS. So a first distinction I would say is application versus platform, which of course means being driven by APIs, being driven by all of the developer tools that empower people to build experiences. A second difference is whereas CMSs are traditionally about managing content, a DXP touches many more aspects of the experience than just the content. For example, it powers the search box. It powers personalization on the site. It might provide analytics and trending that might help enable a webmaster or a digital merchandiser or a digital marketer to figure out what products or services or content to place on that site in the first place. It will provide targeting capabilities so that different segments can receive very different experiences. So whereas traditional CMSs have really just been containers to manage content, DXPs are much broader in the number of touch points even within the website that the customer touches and what it powers. And then the final distinction I would say is whereas a CMS is primarily about web, a DXP really sits behind multiple channels, may power the website, may power apps, mobile apps, may power IoT devices, may power voice-based interactions, may power kiosks, may power stadium digital signage. And we're living in this multi-channel world where customers are not just touching us through a website. And so the DXP, I would say the third major distinction is the fact that it's fundamentally a multi-channel system and enables the management of each of those channels while a traditional CMS is centered on the website.
That was a very detailed and probably perfect explanation to the question. Thanks to that. And just as you mentioned, the Bayern Munich event, as it's just probably 3 miles away from where I'm currently sitting, and I also followed that event. I think that was amazing because also for the developers, they invited everybody to the stadium, and I think it was a one of the kind hackathon that has been done there. So
exactly,
I was pretty impressed on that. My next question actually would have been what products and services you all offer at BloomReach, but you already mentioned many within the platform approach you had been given. Is there anything that you would like to add on all the products and components that you have?
Yeah, and I think to make it really simple, we have several components as we talk about. We have search capabilities, we have content as a service capabilities, we have full experience management capabilities, we have targeting, we have personalization, we have analytics. So lots of capabilities, but we really think of the world in two very simple terms. Either you have an existing experience that you're looking to try to optimize and personalize, or you're building a new experience. And so we really have two fundamental product lines. A product line to enable you to build a new experience, where you can use a lot of our core content management capabilities and several of our APIs in order to build a new experience. Or you have an existing experience, you're trying to improve the conversion rate, you're trying to improve the engagement, you're trying to improve the quality of that existing experience, and you may be using many of our search, personalization, merchandising, analytics capabilities that help you do that. And those are the two fundamental value propositions of BloomReach, and it's one of the things that makes it unique is because it's a API-driven platform. You can start and use multiple pieces of this platform in many different ways, and you can get started whether you're early in the digital transformation journey or whether you're later in the digital transformation journey and using advanced ML and AI to optimize those capabilities.
Right. So if you look at all of your marketing, you look at your website, you go to the events, the clear impression that one takes away is that you're using AI and ML very effectively, right? And that's your whole marketing strategy, it looks like, which is great. So how do you define it, right? And there are a lot of folks out there retroactively applying the terms AI and ML to things they've done forever, right? It's kind of been broadly expanded. How is what you're doing? Well, first define it, and then maybe also you can go into a little detail, if you could, about how what you're doing is actually AI and ML.
Sure, absolutely. So maybe to just trace the origin of BloomReach, I talked about how we started a company to build this digital experience platform. Well, one of the unique things about BloomReach is we actually did not start in the CMS space. We started really with next generation search and personalization using ML and AI. The original team that built BloomReach had built the Google search engine. And so they came out of Google and started to think about how that quality of techniques was really then being could be applied to the content space, to product search, and to problems of that type. And there were several things that we did in the early days of BloomReach that remain true about the AI and ML platform today. The first was really the ability to crawl and ingest large amounts of data. And so any AI and ML system, I think, starts with a lot of data. And for us, that means data about who the user is, data about the products and services and content that are on offer, and data really about what's in demand globally on the internet. And then we apply the AI and ML techniques on top of that data set to then answer the question, what's the perfect experience I can put in front of you at this moment that gives you a better result? So the center of our AI and ML technology, I would not describe our AI and ML technology as applicable to any general purpose application. We don't do things like fraud prevention or cancer screening, or there's so many applications of AI and ML. And our view of it is we're centered on applying AI and ML to the digital experience so that we can help brands offer customers a great experience in the moment of truth when they have paid good marketing money to acquire them to a website, app, or other digital touch point. And when you think about it that way, I think we think of AI and ML really as a continuum. You've got all the way on one side, basic collaborative filtering techniques, basic, rules-based personalization techniques that I would say are much more just understanding cohorts of users and determining what content to put in front of them in a slightly more rules-based way. And then all the way on the other side, you might have general AI, where the system is really taking a very small amount of data. It's applying very, very general purpose AI techniques and predicting what might make sense for a given user, where a human being may not be able to see a pattern. A machine is able to to make some sense of it and apply it. And really, the BloomReach spectrum of technology spans that entire gamut. We don't believe that one is superior to the other. We believe that it's a continuum of technologies that start with rules-based, that move into collaborative filtering, that move into self-learning systems and machine learning, that move into much more discrete AI and end with general AI. And we use variants of the algorithms that span that continuum to solve different parts of the experience problem set. You can imagine that a problem like image recognition or a problem like color identification or metadata extraction is a very different kind of problem than search, than personalization, than clustering for analytics purposes. And so you need to be using what makes the most sense for each of those purposes.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So stepping back a little bit, you acquired Hippo not too long ago, as you mentioned, right? Maybe just walk us through the rationale for making that acquisition. And then also logistically and organizationally, Hippo and BloomReach were roughly the same size. How do you integrate two similarly sized organizations without creating a lot of resentment and organizational issues?
Yeah, so when we were thinking about getting into the content management space, and I'll confess, I knew really nothing about content management until we started to really study the space and look at Hippo a couple of years ago. And so I had come out of this ML, AI, search, machine learning, personalization world. And we've been very successful, particularly in commerce, powering a lot of these experiences. And so as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, look, we are being really successful building these commerce experiences, often sitting on top of an existing platform, but powering search, powering personalization, things of that type. But really, it was a little weird because people would use a content management system or sometimes a monolithic commerce platform to power the website. And then they would make API calls to BloomReach and overwrite everything they had built statically on those platforms with an API call to BloomReach that would return back real-time content. And then the page the user would see would really come from BloomReach, but within a container that was statically configured within something like a content management system. And so I thought, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We were in the world of optimizing websites and apps, but shouldn't we build it the right way in the first place rather than optimizing something that's broken? And so I felt like if we owned a content management system, we would enable customers to build a really smart digital experience from the beginning, using the best qualities of CMS, but embedding in it and imbuing in it the intelligence capabilities, and that would then enable people to create a digital experience the right way from the beginning. And then second, I felt like we had the opportunity to roll this out across commerce and across a wide range of services verticals like financial services and healthcare and government and so on and so forth. And so, for both of those reasons, we felt like owning a CMS would make a lot of sense. And so, the thesis behind that was, look, CMSs are the foundation of how websites and apps and other digital touchpoints are built. And then we can take the intelligence capabilities and create a very different kind of DXP if we put these things together. To your question about integrating the company. So yeah, BloomReach was actually 3 times bigger than Hippo when we acquired Hippo. So we were definitely bigger. But at the same time, not much bigger. We were not 10 times bigger. And so no doubt, the challenge of first acquiring a private company, doing so where that company was predominantly in Europe while we were predominantly an American company, and then aligning against this vision and executing, was not a trivial undertaking. So I think it's actually worked out unbelievably well. 2.5 years later, it's a very connected, single team, single product strategy, single go-to-market. And so it's been a very successful effort for us. And I think that stems from a few things. The first is it all starts with culture and values. And so spending a ton of time with the founders, really understanding what kind of company they were looking to create, aligning that with BloomReach. And we found that despite that we were separated by a continent, there was a lot in common. We were all fundamentally entrepreneurs trying to change the digital experience in different ways. And so that the alignment of values, culture, thinking, mission, all of that, I think, was the starting point to make a lot of sense. The second was really being centered on understanding very clearly what to integrate and what not to integrate, and not trying to integrate everything too quickly, but at the same time, integrating the right things. And so we spent a bunch of time making sure we didn't disrupt each other's businesses as well, in addition to making sure that we could help realize the benefits that we sought to achieve by putting the companies together. And so we were very deliberate about that process. And then finally, I think we were able to create a connected leadership team that ultimately brought the company together, answer the hard questions like which brand, which leaders, who's going to be responsible for what, and being very clear and crisp about an operational plan that backed that up.
Yeah, you should definitely write something about that, Raj, because I think it is, not often it works out that well at other companies, and I think you
absolutely
did it pretty good. And probably currently you don't have time, but maybe in a few years you should either write a couple of articles or a book or something on how everything worked out. Maybe one more question there. I'm not sure if you also, before you integrated Hippo into your organization, if BloomReach had a lot of open source activities, but I know that Hippo had and has. So how was it on taking that over and working with a strong open source community?
Yeah, I think what was good about BloomReach was very much kind of open APIs, I would say. So we very much had the modular approach. Everything we did was always as a service from the beginning of the company. So from that perspective, it was kind of, but we never had an open source community. So that was definitely new. And I think we learned a lot about the Hippo open source community. We learned a lot about the Java stack that Hippo had been built on. And, we've cultivated that community since, and it's been successful for us. So, no, I didn't walk in with any background on open source. But we had a pretty good alignment about how to continue to be open to the open source pieces, but also how to successfully build an enterprise business on top of that.
Yeah, awesome. Let's move forward now into probably a few more technical topics that we would like to chat about. Maybe the first one is an easy one. As a platform, what cloud infrastructure provider have you chosen as your core, and maybe also why have you selected them?
Yeah, so predominantly we run on AWS. Now we also offer a platform as a service capability for our content management, offering, and the platform as a service capability can run on any cloud, because that ultimately is for the customer to determine, which cloud provider they want to run on. So from that perspective, it's open, but we do most of our data processing, our serving infrastructure, our Hadoop clusters, our storage running on AWS.
It's interesting. We at Commerce Tools, we looked at cloud vendors as well, and we loved AWS. It was great. So it's good to hear you found a similar success there. Let's pivot a little bit towards commerce. So you're the glass for the commerce platforms out there. We see, Dirk and I, on a daily basis, we see headless commerce just about everywhere these days. And over the past few years, it's shifted from a what is headless and why to, of course, it's the standard, right? I mean, why wouldn't you go headless? So just a couple quick questions for you, since you marry very tightly with that new trend. Why and why now? And when do organizations actually go headless, right? What's the decision-making process within an organization?
Yeah, so, I think like you, we see the trend around headless commerce, very substantially. And I think it comes from a few different places. The first is that I think that the early e-commerce sites, if we trace back to, say, 10, 15 years ago, when traditional kind of more monolithic e-commerce platforms were emerging, the goal was, hey, let's get an e-commerce site up and running. Let's make sure that we can transact. Let's make sure that we can stand up a website. And now the question is that good enough to compete? If what you're going to do is you're going to go to a Demandware, just to pick on one example, or to any other commerce platform, and use a fixed set of templates and have a standard experience and connect that to a cart and offer e-commerce, and that's your source of differentiation. The question is, why should the shopper ever buy from you when they can go to Amazon and have largely the same experience? So commerce platforms, I think, were a marriage. Historical commerce platforms were a marriage between transactional capabilities and experiential capabilities in one system presented to an end user. And what I was looking for in the early days of e-commerce was just to stand up an e-commerce site, that was great. But I think the world has changed. I think what people have understood is that that's just not good enough. What I actually need to do is I need to, on the one hand, I need to try to innovate on top of a core platform in order to deliver a next generation experience. And that leads them down the DXP road and saying, hey, I need a platform to build on, not just a monolithic system that I can't really control or differentiate on top of. And on the other side, commerce is a well understood stack. So why should I spend the amount of money, spend the amount of time, spend the amount of cycle time, have the friction associated with iterating on a legacy commerce platform when I really want a collection of services connected to an experience platform, of which commerce is perhaps the most important one, because I still need the transactional capabilities, but I just want to call out to that and be able to build on a set of APIs. So I think what's driven the headless commerce trend is microservices as a whole is a well understood architecture, people wanting to really optimize for the experience layer and wanting to make sure that they have flexibility in their choice of transactional capability, and the ability to kind of build in a fast, iterative fashion on top of a commerce API is much more valuable than being stuck with a legacy commerce platform. So I think those are the things that have kind of driven the trend. And I think what leads people down this road is we think of the decision making as a function of the type of organization that they are. And so if you take a brand that is going to market and is early in e-commerce, they have the opportunity to leapfrog the technology stack of their predecessors by going immediately to this kind of experience-led front end with commerce APIs in the back end that connect to commerce as a service, because that's the modern architecture of the future. And so they jump right to that. And for forward-thinking brand leaders, why go through the pain of, I think our average customer that's on a legacy platform replatforms every 2 or 3 years. Painful process where you put the business on hold. So instead of going down that road, go to the modern stack of experience front end and commerce as a service the back end. And then you've got people who I would say are less in the greenfield situation and more in an evolutionary situation. And we see this as well, where people say, hey, I have an existing commerce site. I can't sort of start from scratch. So I want to gradually migrate to this kind of experience-led view. I want to use content as a service. I want to use personalization as a service. I ultimately want to start rendering a collection of websites, but maybe not all of them, or apps. And then I want to start injecting, commerce as a service capabilities and unbundle the services that I'm using for my commerce platform and move them into a more services architecture. And I think either path could work, and it's a function of the state of the business.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And we also see there is a minority of Commerce Tools customers who build front ends from scratch, right? And they forego all of the business user tooling and the content targeting and things like that. And their argument is, look, React these days is pretty great. And if our commerce platform supports GraphQL or some of the more modern API techniques, why not just build something from scratch? And what's your argument to organizations who are considering that, right? Why buy versus build?
Yeah, so actually I think that's a little bit of a false choice in our mind. And what I mean by that is you should be building, but you should be building the core capabilities that represent your competitive advantage. And so what I mean by that is, let's take the example you just gave, which I agree with totally. We're seeing large numbers of BloomReach customers, adopt React front ends, adopt Angular front ends. And actually, one of the powers of the BloomReach platform is we don't say we have to power the delivery tier. We're totally fine with React front ends or Angular front ends, other spas. You can then use BloomReach as content as a service to store your assets. But we shouldn't confuse using something like a React or an Angular with the need for marketers and business people to be in control of the front end. In fact, the ideal situation in our mind is use a spa if that way, you have these modern front ends if you choose, or use us as a delivery tier. But if you use a spa, that doesn't mean that you should have your marketers wait in line with developers every time they want to make a personalization change, a targeting change, want to preview their content, want to target a particular cohort. All that'll happen then is you'll create developer velocity, but you will create friction on the part of business teams, and they'll just be standing in line for IT. So one of the really unique things about the BloomReach platform is you can still use a spa front end if you choose, but you can have the BloomReach system, because of its unique capabilities, enable marketing teams to still be in control of that front end while leveraging APIs on the back end for commerce and for content.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And probably there's one more argument that I would like to add on that. I think it's important that companies start building stuff, and actually they should do more on that, but they should build what makes them unique and what differentiates them. But they should not reinvent the wheel, right? So they should use components and services in a probably, if possible, microservices way, exposed via APIs in a very modern kind of architecture, but they should not reinvent core business functionality. They should consume that, customize it, and then build their experiences with that and on top of it. So
that's right.
Definitely,
I agree with that. Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And I think it's building a great delivery tier is non-trivial. So I think the only thing I would say there is because the platform supports a case where we power the delivery tier, or a case where you build the delivery tier on something like React or Angular. In either case, I think the BloomReach platform can help a lot. But if you choose to build a delivery tier, it's a non-trivial undertaking, because the journey there doesn't stop with the APIs. It extends to the tooling that is important to empower business people to make edits and changes and targeting and personalization. And nothing frustrates business people more than waiting in line for IT to make a change.
Absolutely. Just heading to a different kind of topic, some where you are also scoring pretty well. I think we will get to that in a second. Let's talk about best of breed weather suites. What we see in the commerce space, at least, is that often at least analysts are rating suites in some ways higher than they do with best of breed. So they prefer, if there's everything in, that you can go to one vendor. But on the customer side, we see a trend that's tending more to best of breed. And they say, okay, we pick the selection, the products and components that fit our company best. How is it in the DXP space?
Yeah, so I think the DXP space is slightly different than the commerce space, in that over the last, I would say, 5 or 7 years, there have been 5,000 startups related to marketing technology that have been funded by Silicon Valley VCs. And so there's just a proliferation of small point solutions that do every part of the customer experience, maybe reviews, maybe search, maybe SEO, maybe A/B testing, maybe email, maybe something related to mobile clienteling. So there's just thousands of these point solutions. And so the world as it has existed from our perspective over the previous generation has been, okay, I'm going to have my marketing vendor of choice, I'm going to have my commerce vendor of choice, and then I'm going to go buy some collection of startups to optimize my customer experience. And what we're seeing now is really a movement to kind of 3 simple core platforms for my business. I choose a marketing cloud, and it helps me drive acquisition of new customers. I choose an experience platform, and the job of the experience platform is to present a great experience when the user arrives. And then I choose a commerce platform or service, and the job of the commerce engine is to complete the transaction, make sure that I connect to the back end, really effectively, a transactional system of record. And so what we see is really people moving to this 3-tier view of the world of sort of marketing / customer acquisition, experience, and commerce. And in that view of the world, then the choice becomes, do I go with the suite vendor, i.e. somebody who gives me that entire flow, or do I go with a logical platform, to power the experience? And, we see a lot of suite vendors, and they'll come in and they'll say, if you're Adobe today, you'll come in and you'll say, hey, we can power campaigns off of Adobe Campaign. Then we can power, experience with Adobe Experience Manager. And then you can go buy Magento now, and we will be your commerce platform of choice. And we think that that's not a reflection really of reality. In fact, what in this world in which people want to build competitive advantage into their customer experience, they really need a platform, not a suite. Because a suite, I can go to a CMO and I can say, hey, I have a collection of capabilities. You should just buy them all from one vendor. But they're inflexible individual products. As one of our customers said, hey, I had you guys, BloomReach, compared against Adobe, and you guys were in the final two. And I provided a demo scenario that I wanted you all to build. And I saw that from an Adobe perspective, they were pulling up something like 17 different interfaces to help me accomplish that use case. And I saw that in your case, you had built some lightweight logic on top of your core platform and it solved the use case. And I think that's a perfect encapsulation of suite versus platform. And from a BloomReach perspective, we think that in a world in which customer experience is a major source of competitive advantage, the choice is really clear. You have to have a platform. The days of a website being marketing brochureware are behind us. And as we move to a world where the entire digital experience is at the forefront of your entire business process, the suite direction makes less and less sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just as organizations have to go through digital transformations, the whole do it for me, I'm too lazy or, don't have the skills to do it myself, that argument is just holding less and less water. It's a competitive world. So, on the topic of competition, we intentionally try not to make this an Amazon podcast because we could talk about Amazon all day, but I think a question's warranted here. So what do you say to an organization who's gone through a digital transformation? They've adopted those 3 separate tiers, as you've mentioned. How do you guide somebody on how to compete with Amazon better?
Yeah, so, I think Amazon's a super impressive company. And what they've done over the last 20 years or so has been extraordinarily impressive in terms of their rate of innovation across a really wide range of dimensions and the systematic way by which they attack different markets one by one. And so, for example, we have a number of B2B companies today. They're waking up to the fact that Amazon now has a $10 billion B2B commerce business. Incredible, which probably didn't exist a couple of years ago. And so watching that juggernaut from the perspective of, an enterprise that may either be currently competing with Amazon or otherwise will be future competing with Amazon, I think it's a couple of things. The first is one has to have the table stakes of basic capabilities to provide a modern experience. And so, Amazon is iterating on their experience hundreds of times a year. Do you have the testing, the targeting, the algorithms, the personalization, the next generation search? It's too slow to have to go build those capabilities or say, hey, I'll get to them later. You got to have the table stakes for a modern digital experience today. And we think that's kind of requirement number one. Otherwise, you're spending time catching up to what they built 5 years ago and released. The second is one has to really think carefully about what the source of competitive advantage is. And, it's what you said earlier, Dirk. And, I think organizations often need to go really deep to understand why is it their customers buy from them in the first place? Is it their brand? Is it their selection? Is it the quality of the nature? I was talking to a customer the other day who was saying, yeah, what they're really focused on as a moat is the fact that they are in a complex B2B selling process. And so it's not just buying a part or buying a component, it's buying a full solution. Well, okay, if you're going to offer a very differentiated end-to-end B2B solution online, you have the opportunity to stay differentiated for a while if you continue to cultivate that. Like that, I think the people that have succeeded against Amazon are the ones that have been able to articulate their competitive advantage and then been able to translate that into an experience online that reflects that competitive advantage. And the third is organizational evolution. I think one can have the best strategy in the world, one can have all the table stakes in the world, but one of the things that Amazon does really effectively is just move fast. Try stuff, see if it works, change it out, build more. And that iterative culture, which is often an organizational capability, is I think the third dimension that larger, organizations need to focus on to compete against players like Amazon.
Yeah, and what do you say to brands themselves? So, do you recommend that they sell on Amazon, or that they go it themselves and try to get customers to their websites and mobile apps and others to have the experience with the brand itself? I mean, at what point do you tell a brand to go on Amazon, I guess?
I think it's very tempting to go sell on Amazon because they have distribution and you want to grow fast. But I think Amazon is not like your traditional retail brand relationship, because Amazon is in the business of taking your brand, putting it online, understanding the customer behavior that drives people to your brand, and then marginalizing you either with their own brand or commoditizing your space by having a collection of similar brands so that they can offer their customers the maximum choice. So I think, it is a really it's a very poor long-term choice to bet your customer acquisition and your customer experience on Amazon when fundamentally they are out to commoditize you as a brand. And that's the path that folks like Toys R Us went down, and many others, where they were so dependent on Amazon, and ultimately Amazon destroyed them. And so, no, I think that doesn't work. I think using Amazon as a customer acquisition vehicle might be fine, just as one might use Google or Facebook or any other marketing technique. But ultimately, you have to control the customer experience you provide to the user, cultivate that customer experience. And the job is to make sure that the next time a customer is looking for your brand, once you have paid good money to acquire them in the first place, they come directly to you. And I think it's the only way to remain independent and long-term successful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a challenging world for most, especially retailers, but in some degree also for the brands, as they are depending on them and on their performance. I think one way could be that they also focus a little bit more on making the in-store experience better. I don't know what your thoughts are around that. I know that you're also focusing along all channels and not only the web and mobile device touch points. So how do you see that evolving? And what are, for example, doing your customers? You have a lot of retail customers as well.
Sure.
How are they making the in-store shopping experience better?
Well, I think a lot of what's happening is a collapsing between in-store and e-commerce. And I think that's very healthy for these retailers because, as you say, one of their assets is their store footprint. And so having worked through, kind of the real estate challenges with owning a store footprint, the digital experience really, it doesn't mean somebody sitting in front of a computer buying online. It could as well mean, somebody walking into a store, that being automatically detected through sensors, that being, presented into a clienteling app, and then enabling somebody to provide great service that then encourages that person to come back. So, I think one of the interesting things about what, the most successful retailer in stores in the last decade probably has been Apple, which is fundamentally a digital company. And it just shows the power of what a great physical experience can do to complement a great digital experience. And I think, many brands and retailers have that potential. And so I totally agree that, one, digital touch points are hugely present in physical spaces. And two, there's a great opportunity to harmonize those two, in providing a very differentiated experience.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. One final question before we wrap, as we're ending we're getting towards the end of our episode here. So BloomReach has a lot of buzz out there in the industry, right? Even though you're a reasonably sized company, a couple hundred people, but the amount of buzz I hear out there about you is comparable to a company much larger. How have you managed to score so well in the Magic Quadrant and Forrester Wave evaluations? You get lots of good mentions from them. And there are a lot of VCs and others in the industry talking about how you're powering the next generation of commerce. How have you done that with a fairly small marketing team?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think we are off to a good start. We do have a ways to go in that regard, but I think it comes down to having a combination of an insight that is unique and different. And so, by positioning the DXP the way we power, position it open, intelligent, API driven, ML and AI powered, it presents an alternative that is worth talking about in the first place. So I think the raw material is good, and that helps us a lot. And then second, I think we see the analyst relationships, the channel relationships, the partner relationships, the customer relationships as things that are really important to invest in and cultivate much more broadly. Many technology companies, I think, make the assumption that if I invest in great technology and maybe hire some good salespeople, I'm done. And I think we haven't looked at it that way. We view it as much more of a value chain that includes product development and certainly includes great salespeople, but includes effective product marketing, thinking through ecosystem, really enabling sales engineering teams, working through with analysts, all the constituent parts that make a platform take hold, and investing time and effort against all of them.
Got it. Well, whatever you're doing, it seems to be working. I'll tell you that. And it's good to see a company succeed like that. So congratulations. With that, we are at the end of the episode. Thanks again, Raj, for taking the time to speak with us. We very much appreciate it. And have a good rest of your day.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.